Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Okay, welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And as promised, I invited Christopher back onto the show because I had so many questions and they didn't get answered. And still, we got on and we had a good 10-minute conversation because it's just so easy to converse with you. I love it. And I have so many questions about this. But I want to start back kind of where we ended on the last podcast. And I know this is going to feel like we're jumping in. But if you guys didn't listen to the last podcast with Christopher Volk, go listen to it. This is the second podcast. It'll be on the notes, but this is the second podcast, which means you're going to feel like you're jumping into a conversation in the middle of it because you are. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We're going to have lots of questions here, but to understand who Christopher is and why these questions are so pertinent and his authority to speak on the questions, you really should go listen to the last podcast. So we ended the last conversation kind of asking how you were able to take, you took this first company, you learned a bunch in that first company, and then you made it a little bit faster in the second company, third company. So you're now taking 3 companies public. What did you learn in each of those processes that made it so that you could more easily duplicate that process?
Right. So the first company we took public in 1994, and what that company did was it owned pilot chain restaurants. We owned everything from Pizza Huts to Burger Kings, and we were renting them all to franchisees and sometimes to the brand owners themselves if it wasn't a franchise chain.
Question really quick. When you say pilot chain restaurants, what does pilot mean?
I mean, I would say pilot. I mean, they're franchised, I mean, we were basically doing sale leasebacks with chain restaurant properties. Okay. So we had over 1,000 of them. Sorry if I said pilot, I didn't think. Anyway, so we were doing 1,000 chain restaurant properties when we took this thing public, and as we grew it, we started doing other things. So, for example, we did Flying J truck stops, which is based out of Brigham City, Utah, and I think you're out of Utah originally. Yep. And we did. We got into automotive parts and services. We got eventually into some convenience stores and gas, and we grew the company up to several thousand properties, and then we sold it to GE. And I could have stayed there for a pretty long time, but I realized that I wasn't really working hard enough and wasn't earning my keep in my mind. So, and I really wasn't having a good time. And I left, and I had job offers to go somewhere else. And there's this time in your life where you have a chance to go be an entrepreneur and start something, and you can either take it or not take it. And I just thought that I would look back on my life and regret not having taken it. So I did it, and I decided really that I'd rather make less money working for myself than more money working for somebody else. So and I started the second company, and the second company I decided I didn't want to do just chain restaurants, and I didn't want to do just convenience stores. I wanted to branch out into different types of real estate. And again, it was all real estate being used by people, but it was going to be kind of operationally essential real estate for companies. And I decided to change the business model that we had. So at our first company, we had 250 employees, and I decided that we could outsource a lot of these job functions, and we could actually make our staff leaner, and we could turn what was a fixed cost into a sort of a smaller variable cost, and make the business model just better. And so when you have a chance to do something twice, or in my case, 3 times, it's a really marvelous experience because you can make things just better and better every single time you do it, And we did that company for a number of years, sold it to a Australian investment bank, and and when I left that company to start our third company, I decided that I was going to change that again. I decided I didn't really want to do just critical real estate. I decided that the thing I wanted to focus on was any piece of real estate that had a profit and loss statement hooked to it. So, for example, if you think about a chain restaurant, there's a P&L hooked to every single chain restaurant. You could have a guy who runs 20 Burger King units, and every single one of them has its own profit and loss statement. And you could find the same thing with manufacturing facilities that have a profit and loss statement, or veterinary clinics have one, or early childhood education, or fitness clubs. They're all running this group of profit centers. And I decided that if I could know how well all these stores did, and I could get all their financial information, then I wasn't just really making a credit decision on the company. I was making a decision that was deeper than that. I was making a decision based upon how every single property did, and knowing that, which is one step better than that. And it's, by the way, things that you don't get if you own like a Home Depot, or you own a Walmart, or you own a CVS drugstore. These investment grade companies won't share the profit and loss statements with you. They just don't give them to anybody. But when you're dealing with middle market companies, they will share all this stuff with you, and it's terrific. And it helps you really understand the risk you're taking when you make an investment. So, and so we focused on doing this, and we also changed up our business model a little bit further. We, again, outsourced more jobs. We made the company smaller so that by the time I left, we had, from our third company, we had twice the assets that we had in our first company with half the people. And we had just improved the business model and made it much better. And by doing this, and by spending a lot of time focusing on the business model and how we were operating the company, I was able to attract investors, and foremost, I was able to attract Warren Buffett to buy 10% of the company. So, and it was really a business model speech that got that done, to be able to get high quality investors to understand what we were creating and why it was so such a high quality prospect to be able to do. So we just created a better and better business model across 3 generations of businesses, ultimately concluding in the last one I took public.
And I love that. So I have a few questions about that are, some are like, some of these questions are going to be more just because I'm curious about the industry, because I don't know much about it. And then others are how we're going to relate this to our lives. But first, why would anybody, whether they're a business owner, maybe they're not a business owner, what would be the cause of somebody wanting to own the business but only lease the real estate? Why would somebody not want to own the real estate and the business?
Okay, so I worked with somebody one time who said that people naturally want to own the real estate because George Washington or their parents or somebody told them that it's a good thing to own real estate. But when you're owning a business, there are some problems with owning the real estate. For one thing, unlike your house, there's no such thing as a 30-year mortgage. When you go buy a house, you get a 30-year mortgage. Not only do you get a 30-year mortgage, you can prepay it anytime you want to. There's no penalty to it or anything. You can just prepay it. And there are no covenants to it. Like you're not locked out from prepayment. You don't have to behave in any certain way necessarily when you're getting a mortgage loan on your house. But with commercial loans, it's different. So it turns out that if you're running, let's say, a fitness club chain, there is no 30-year money. There's not even 20-year money. I mean, and if you're going to get long-term money, it often has payment lockouts. So you actually can't even prepay the loan.
It's almost like a bond where they're expecting a certain amount of return over time, and they don't
right. And then let's say you sell your company, or you want to sell your company at some point, and you say, I'd like to sell this business and have someone else take the business over from me. The loans you have aren't even assumable, right? And so you could be running a business where you've got all these loans outstanding, you can't prepay them, they're not assumable. And so it actually prevents you from really running your business and selling it, or changing out the locations you have, or even if you want to go into a location and expand it, make it bigger, it's hard to do this. And so what I did was I created these companies and convinced people that they were really better off having a landlord rather than a banker, because we would do all these things for them. We would make the leases assumable. We would put more money into locations if they wanted to expand them. We would help them close locations if they wanted to close them and relocate them. We would be effectively a business partner for them that would allow them to run their business more effectively. And to make things even better, because we were providing all the capital for the real estate rather than just 70% of the money. When you go to a bank or something, they're not going to give you a 100% loan for real estate. So we were giving them all the money. Then basically people could save the equity they would otherwise put in that real estate, and they could put that equity into business expansion. They could further grow. And it turns out that people tend to make more money running fitness clubs than they do owning real estate. The bigger the business gets, the return on each business ends up being better than just owning real estate. And so we had a sea of investors willing to make a lower rate of return, and we enabled them to make a higher rate of return. And the result of it was we created a lot of millionaires over the years. We didn't create them; they created themselves, but we helped them, and it was really gratifying to do that.
So what's like a difference in? I'm just trying to bring this down to the level that I would understand and somebody else would understand, not being in the industry. What's the difference of a payment? Because obviously they still have to pay to be in your building. It's not like a lease. There's still a payment attached to a lease. What's the difference in a payment to if they owned the building and they had to pay the bank over 10 years or whatever versus the payment on a lease, just so we understand what that margin is that they're able to reinvest into their business?
Okay, so it just depends over the years, but sure. Our lease payments on average were probably our lease rate, let's call it our lease rate, on average was probably 1.5% to 2% higher than they could borrow the money at, right? So they were borrowing the money, right? But keep in mind, there's two things. When you borrow money, you're paying the interest rate, so you're getting a cheaper rate than what we would do. But you're having to pay the money back. So your payment constant is a higher number. So let's say your interest rate is 6%. And of course, borrowing today is actually more than 6%. But let's say your interest rate is 6%. What world are you living in? 3 years ago. So let's say your interest rate is 6%. Your monthly payment would be more like 8% because you're paying a chunk of principal back, right? So in the case of a lease, our monthly payment was kind of equivalent to what you would be paying for owning it. Only we weren't just replacing the bank debt. So we were doing more than that. We were replacing the equity that you would otherwise have to put in. And when you're looking at businesses and you're factoring in the cost of running a business, one of the things that you focus on is what's called the cost of capital. And the cost of capital is basically the cost of leases, the cost of debt, and then also the cost of equity. Equity has a cost to it, So if you're raising money today from investors, let's say you're raising money from a private equity investor, they're going to be looking to make a return on equity of somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% pre-tax. And so if I have 30% of my money invested in a piece of real estate in equity, that's going to be equity that wants to make 20%. And then I'd have 70%, I'd be borrowing money at 6%, right? Or my choice with the companies I had was, we'll give you 100% of the money at 8%, right? And it turns out that 8% is actually lower than the blended cost of the 20% at 30% of the deal and the 6% loan. And so by lowering people's cost of capital, the whole thing to do is to make the business more valuable and make our customers richer.
So I'm going to try and simplify this. I think I'm following what you're saying, but somebody who doesn't know anything about this may not be. So
sure.
By choosing the lease, you're eliminating the need for the down payment to get the loan. And that down payment of 30%, let's say $1 million property, now rather than having $700,000 financed and $300,000 you had to put in and just sit there to basically be trusted that you're going to keep paying the loan, that $300,000 now, instead of doing that, let's say your payment on the $700,000 was going to be $5,000 a month. I don't know what the payments would be, but let's say it's going to be $5,000 a month. Now you pay maybe $5,000 or $6,000 a month from day one, but you didn't have to go in with $300,000.
Correct.
Okay,
And
so it's that extra money that's now $294,000 of money that you get to go into business expansion rather than sitting in a piece of real estate that you're also still owing on that equity money potentially on top of your loan.
right. And for people owning a business, or if entrepreneurs are owning a business, that $300,000 isn't free. I mean, it's
Sure.
that 300,000 has a cost to it.
Yeah, even if you had the cash, there's still an opportunity cost of putting it into a 4% appreciating real estate deal or something versus your business that you can turn 100, 200% rate of return.
Right. And that 300,000 turns out to have a cost somewhere in the neighborhood of, 20%. I mean, it's an expensive number, and which could be the opportunity cost you're also talking about, but it has a real cost to it. And so what we're doing is we're lowering people's costs by giving them the sale leaseback. We're increasing the amount of cash flow they have to expand their business to get to be bigger and bigger. We're also giving them a contract that's more flexible and allows them to run their business. And that flexibility there are other opportunities costs and flexibility. If you have a loan and you can't prepay it without expenses, if it's locked out to prepayment unless you pay a huge fee, that is an opportunity cost. If that loan has covenants on your business, that's an opportunity cost. It restricts what you can do. If the loan can't be added to or modified, so let's say you want to expand your property, that's an opportunity cost. And so what we're going to do is take away all those opportunity costs. We're basically effectively providing you opportunity cost insurance so that you can run your business and make more money and just get richer. I mean, and the goal here is to create a capital structure for companies that allows people to maximize their personal wealth. Now, I will tell you this. Sale leasebacks are not for everyone. I mean, the richest guy in the state of Arizona for a long time is a guy named Bruce Halley, and Bruce Halley was the owner of Discount Tires. So if you've seen Discount Tire locations, and your listeners have seen them, they're all over the place. And Bruce originally found a different way to finance his real estate, which is he got tire companies to help lend him money and lend him like 100% of the money to be able to buy his tire locations. And then ultimately, he became so wealthy that he ended up owning all the real estate because he didn't know what else to do with the cash, right? So if you're like Bruce, you can own all the real estate and get there. And if I'd gone to Bruce and said, and Bruce sort of knew who I was, and if I said, Bruce, we can take all your real estate and we can own it and rent it to you. You can become a tenant of ours. He wouldn't have ever done it because he wouldn't have known what to do with the money. And so real estate's just like business. It's an investment. And if you've got enough cash and you can afford to make the investment, you should do it. But if you're trying to grow a business and you can really use that cash to grow your business, then you're way better off doing that and choosing a landlord.
And that's what I wanted to kind of highlight. And I just wanted to ask these questions to be sure that I was hearing it right. You're offering more of a service, even though you're in the business of real estate. What you're offering to a client is not necessarily real estate, but a service of how to eliminate all of these concerns that they normally would have had to start a business or grow a business. You're offering the service of eliminating all of those. You're in the business of real estate, but you're offering this service where somebody who already has all the money and they just like, I don't want it sitting in my bank account, so I'm going to go put it somewhere. They may not need that service. Just like if maybe you're a mechanic and you like fixing your own cars, you may not need the service of a mechanic, right? But if you're somebody who doesn't have the time, doesn't enjoy it, whatever, then maybe you'd rather have that service than the money. And it's just kind of like I think it's really cool to understand. The reason I'm bringing this up in this way is when we're talking about legacy, I think it's important for people to think about where's a gap in the marketplace? Where do I see a gap in the marketplace that I could provide value? And it doesn't matter where that gap is, as long as you can define the gap, communicate the gap to somebody else, and somebody else sees the gap and thinks that you could fulfill that gap at a lower cost than what they're currently doing at, then there's money to be made. Like business is really not incredibly difficult. It really comes down to those, to very simplistic things. But so many people, they go around complaining about life looking at, oh man, this should be different. I wish this was different. And they never ask themselves the critical thinking question of, if I was going to do it, how would I do it differently? Ask yourself that question first. If I see a problem, what would I do differently? And once you come up with a clear explanation of that, then share it with people. And you'd be surprised how many people will pay you to solve their problems. Because if you're seeing a problem, other people see it, they just don't know what to do. So they keep doing what they're doing.
That's totally right. I mean, and all businesses are there to solve a problem. Every business. I mean, and the problem could be how to take a rocket to outer space and how to launch a satellite. And the problem could be how to serve somebody healthy food at lunch. I mean, the problems range, and you're always solving something for a customer, and you're thinking about that customer all the time. The customer is number one. I mean, when you're creating a business, that's who you're thinking about very first. And you're saying, do I have a market? Will the customer pay for it? And can I affordably do this so I can make a decent return for my investment and for my shareholders? And if you can do that, if you can create a business model around that service, then you can start to create wealth for yourself, but you can also add to other people's lives, which is terrific.
Absolutely. So let's go into, I'm going to make a pit stop. I didn't write this question down, but it just came up in something you said. So again, we're going back to this legacy conversation. You have had your experience building public companies, and I'm putting public companies in air quotes if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, not because he didn't actually create a public company on all those terms, but public company could mean different things, right? And in context of this conversation, I think each person is taking their life public. The fact that you live a life and others see you live a life, then your company or your life is public. Now you can try and keep it private if you want and not share it with anybody. But when you share it with nobody and you sit in your house and you do nothing, that's a good recipe for death, which goes into the final question or another question I have for you. But who would you say, because you're a father, your kids are growing. I'm assuming you're a sibling, you're a son, all these different roles you face. Also, you might be part of your community in service roles. You might be part of a church in other roles. Talk about, although you're not taking a company public for sale, what are the same lessons about values and character that you're taking yourself public and you have shareholders in your life? How do you make sure that your decisions personally, privately, and you're making the best decisions, not just for yourself as a company, but for the shareholders around you that are believing in you, caring about you, supporting you, even though they may not be actively involved in any financial aspect? Talk about it from a personal perspective. Who are your shareholders? Who do you think are the shareholders in your life that you're beholden to or that you care to think about when you're making personal decisions? And how has those decisions been influenced by your company decisions?
Yeah, we're right. I mean, or how have company decisions been influenced by those decisions? I mean, I have always been deeply devoted to the golden rule, and have tried really hard in my career and my personal life to treat other people as I would like to be personally treated, and to care about people as I would like to be cared for, and to conduct things in a fair way. I tend to be when it comes to free enterprise, I tend to be an evangelist for free enterprise because I find that it is fundamentally righteous, because there are these alignments of interest where you can't get a lot of customers unless you treat them right, and you can't get employees to work for you in a good business unless you treat them right. I mean, so there's a kind of a circle of righteousness that comes into a free enterprise or an entrepreneurial venture that has to be fulfilled in order for a company to call itself successful. And so I've taken a lot of the values that I've had in my personal life in terms of my, everything from my 43-year marriage to how I raise my children and then with my wife and how we run our lives to serving on boards in our community to help better people, and creating companies that help an array of constituents. I mean, and the constituents, there is a pecking order when you're starting a business. So the constituents do start with the customer first, and then shareholder tends to come second. But if you can get that balance right, then you can really help all your employees further their careers and to create good lives for their families. And then you can give back to your community and support charitable causes, and then create customers. You're with the customers that you're helping, you're making a difference in their lives. And I think that all of us want to do that. And I guess behind the golden rule is the next thing, which is that I want to personally be able to make a positive difference in the lives of others. I think we all want to leave the world better than we saw it when we came in. That would be the ideal thing to do. So in making a positive personal difference for others, then you can sleep well at night. I mean, we can all feel good about ourselves in terms of what we're trying to do. And I view that all of this is interrelated. I mean, how one deals with their personal life and business life. A close business associate of mine once said that how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And that so what you do in your personal life and how you conduct yourself there tends to filter into how you conduct yourself in your professional life.
Yeah. And that I actually, I told my wife that on our third date. And she was like, what? Because we were mountain biking, and I'd been mountain biking lots and lots that summer, and it was her first time in like 3 years. She was ahead of me going up the mountain, and she meant it very innocently, but she turned around. She's like, "Hey, you can just go ahead, and I'll catch up." And like, I'm on a third date with this girl, so it's not like I'm like wanting to go on a date by myself. Like if I wanted to go up the mountain by myself, I wouldn't have invited you. Anyways, so I stopped and was like, "What did you just say? Is that the type of relationship you're looking for? That when you're struggling, I'm just going to ditch you, and when I'm struggling, you're just going to ditch me on the side of a mountain, and hope we claw our way to the top? Because if it is, that's just not going to work for me. We can turn the bikes around, go home, and I'm sure you're going to make somebody really happy. It just won't be me." And I mean, third date, just imagine you're just like, what is this guy coming at me with this? But for me, I understood that the way you do one thing is the way you do most things in your life. And so she's like, "Well, I didn't mean that." And so I said that to her. I was like, "Well, the way you do one thing is the way you do most things. So if that's a principle that you want to live your life by, that you're going to ditch people or that you expect to be ditched, I'm just not into it." Right? She's like, "Well, that's not what I meant at all." I was like, "Okay, well, we can keep going. But yeah, that's not going to work in our relationship ever, And I'm so grateful that I had that conversation on our third date, and that it set the tone for our relationship to the point that we both, when we're struggling, we can very confidently go to the other person and say, "Hey, we need help right now, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it is." And we both agreed early on to be there for each other.
Well, I mean that's a really essential part of a good marital relationship. I mean, that's ideally you're each other's best friend, and you're there to support one another always, and it's and you can count on each other without reservation. And I have a wife I can count on all the time, and who's really helped me get to where I am, and I've done what I can to help her be who she wants to be, and she's my best friend. So I agree with that.
Yeah, and anyways, it's just so true. Those are your shareholders, the people that are invested in your life, and they're making everything possible. How do you keep that relationship honest, true, and clear and transparent with them? So the other thing that you mentioned, and it's kind of leading this because it all comes back to who you are, and I want to highlight who you are because I love who you are, Christopher. That's why I want to have the second conversation. But you recognized in the first company that you weren't working hard enough or challenging yourself enough. I feel like there's a lot of people who they're just fine collecting a paycheck, and the less work they have to do, the better to collect a paycheck. But I think that this sets a lot of people, it sets the great apart from the people who are just existing, the people who recognize, hey, there's more that I could give. There's still more left in me. There's still more left to experience. Talk about that. Like, how did you come to that conclusion that, man, it's not what you want it to be anymore?
Well, on our first session in this podcast, I mentioned that I had early on in my career, as my career was just getting started, I had sent out about 350 resumes at a time where there was no email. So you're doing this by direct mail, and writing, having resumes typed out or copied was a big deal. And sending letters had to be done by typewriter because there was no computer and stuff. And so I sent out 350 resumes and basically got turned down 350 times. So I realized, having gone through that level of difficulty, that jobs didn't grow on trees. I mean, sometimes I think today in our low unemployment era, people think that jobs are much more readily available. But when I was working and getting a job, it was much more difficult. So when I got my first job at a bank, financial institution in Atlanta, Georgia, I just made a determination that I was going to do it to the best of my ability. And I never wanted to ever be in a position like I had been before. I never wanted to have that kind of hardship where it was so difficult for me to find employment. And I was going to, honor the position that I had and realize that jobs didn't grow on trees. And so if I was ever had any downtime, I volunteered to help anybody else. I mean, I made sure that I was working, every moment of the day when I was there. And then of course I worked on weekends, I worked at nights. I mean, I put in a lot of hours. And so, and anybody who's put in a lot of hours, by the way, knows that it can be a little disheartening because you'll get a 5% raise one year, and the next person who wasn't really putting in much time gets a 3% raise. So you're getting very little for the extra effort that you're putting in. But what you are doing is you're making an investment in yourself. Which is, by the way, when I was getting my master's of business education, I had my MBA. The bank paid for a lot of that, and it had a program to do this. Now, the bank had about 1,000 employees, and the number of employees that were willing to go to school at night was probably inside of 50. It might have been inside of 20. And I could see this, by the way, even when I talk to friends who've been in the military on the GI plan, where the government will pay for your education, and how many people actually don't take that. It's a lot of people that just don't take this free gift that's out there. But it's because education is hard. I mean, you really have to work. I mean, I was going to school until 10 o'clock at night, and I was coming home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, 2 days a week. And it was extremely difficult. And I did this for 5 years, roughly, to get that done. And but I viewed the whole thing as being an investment in myself. And that's, everybody makes investments, and the first investment you ever make is in yourself. And it's very hard for people to make that investment sometimes. I mean, it's spiritually difficult, it's emotionally difficult. But once you commit to doing it, then you're making things happen. And I always have, one of my other things besides the golden rule is the notion that either you make things happen or things will happen to you. So you have to be in charge of your own life, and you have to try to make things happen, make your career happen, make your career decisions, be affirmative about what you're doing. Because in business, there is no roadmap. I mean, when you get into business, there's so many things you can do. And if you're aspiring to leadership, which I did aspire to leadership early on, you have to put yourself in a position to be able to do that, which means you have to have the education, you have to have the knowledge, you have to be coming at the job from the right positions all the time. So you have to manage what you're doing. And the point you made is so true. There are people out there, hopefully none in your audience, but there are people out there where they're content to have a job and to draw a paycheck, perhaps not work all that hard to get it, and think that their life is okay, and they're not making things happen. They're allowing things to happen to them, and so if they get laid off or something happens to them like this, they perhaps didn't see it coming when they maybe should have seen it coming. Because if you're not working that hard, it shouldn't be a surprise to you if somebody ultimately lays you off, right? So I think people have to be really self-aware about what they're doing and make positive choices for themselves and for their families. And a lot of it is not only for personal satisfaction, but to also look back at your career and say, I'm really glad I did this, and I didn't lose this opportunity. I took advantage of what was available to me, and that's something I've always tried to live my life by.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Is like taking that time. There's a song, I don't know, I think it's by Paul Cardell, and it's really just it's called "The Noise." And it's just a bunch of like maybe what you'd hear in like a torture chamber of just like random noises. And it's like 4 minutes long, but the only words in the whole entire, I would just call it music. I don't know if I would even call it song, but the only words in the whole thing is kind of like from in the distance, like a megaphone type thing. It says there's 3 types of people in the world: those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and then those that say what happened. And it's so true.
Exactly.
That like you get to choose which one of those you want to be. And in COVID time, in 2021, that's actually one of the reasons why we moved to Arizona, is because Charlie, my wife, and my oldest son, Declan, at that time, he was like obsessively, he couldn't go to sleep if there was a little wrinkle in his blanket, or all the things weren't exactly so, kind of like what we were talking about before we started recording, of the coddling of the mind. It's just like, if everything wasn't just to his liking, then it was impossible to sleep or impossible to do anything. It's like, this is an unhealthy habit to not be able to deal with change. Like you have to, I believe, this is a Sam belief, you have to be able to handle change. And so as I started to like analyze my life and how did I build the muscle of handling change, and the best way I can think of it is if the imagery of like running on ice, right? The ice is floating in the water, and it could be cracking behind you or all around you. But if you are moving across the unsettled ground or unsettled surface faster than it's moving, then you can make it across. Running on if we had GAC when I was a kid, like the cornstarch in water, right? If you're hitting it hard, it's as if it's cement. But if you sit there too long, then you just sink into it. And these types of images, for me, it's like the world is going to change around us. We can't change or affect whether or not the world changes. It absolutely will change. The question is, are you going to be moving fast enough through the world with focus and intention and purpose to your next destination, fast enough that you're changing faster than the change around you is changing? Because it's going to change around you. But are you moving purposefully faster and changing faster than the world around you is changing? And if you are, then it's going to look like the world is standing still, even though the world is moving. But if you're going 80 miles an hour and there's a car going 20 miles an hour and you pass it, it looks like that car is absolutely standing still, even though we all know it's not. It looks like it is because you're moving faster. So how do we move faster with focus, purpose, and intention in life? And we can really eliminate the anxiety of change happening around us.
This is so true, and it's true in business too. In the book I wrote, I gave the analogy of Blockbuster Video for any listener of yours that actually can remember a Blockbuster Video. But these were Blockbuster Video was the leading video rental chain in the United States when videotapes and then later on DVDs came out, and a Blu-ray disc came out. And I've rented a zillion tapes and DVDs over the years, and then you had Netflix that was out there, and Netflix was doing the exact same thing. They were just simply giving you the DVDs by mail. So rather than having all the bricks and mortar around that Blockbuster had, and Blockbuster also had franchisees too. The guys at Netflix would just mail you the DVD and you would watch it and then you'd send it back to them. And so everybody knew that there was going to be bandwidth at some point in time that was going to allow video streaming, right? And so everybody knew that all these Blockbuster stores were going to shut down. And I, as a real estate investor, never owned a Blockbuster video store for that reason. I mean, I knew that eventually it was going to be going away. And as this gets down to, the change is coming, and sometimes you can actually see the change. I mean, we see the changes that are out there. We know eventually the technology is going to be there, and our tendency is to wrongly predict when things are going to happen. So most people thought that video streaming was going to happen faster than it did, but ultimately it came about, and so Netflix and Blockbuster both had the wrong business model to deal with it. But in the case of Netflix, they pivoted and they turned into a video streaming monster, behemoth. They turned into the leading video streaming company. Blockbuster started making some investments to do exactly the same thing and was basically prevented from doing so by some activist shareholders that chose to give them a hard time over this. And the result was that
those shareholders, they needed some.
Yeah, and so because it was expensive. I mean, and what you were doing was you were changing a business model where you were going to actually shut down 1,000+ stores around the country, or thousands of stores around the country, and shut them down and incur that expense in order to avoid a move from a bricks and mortar business into a streaming business. Very painful transition. But not going through that transition, they went out of business, and they went out of business very fast. Whereas Netflix, of course, went to soar to great heights. And I think that people have to be responsive to change. They have to embrace change. They have to make change happen for themselves. And sometimes, as in this case, you'll see change coming, and it really helps to get ahead of that as opposed to trying to react to it too late, and that's what we can all be guilty of sometimes.
Yeah. And I just love that that's part of your story of recognizing maybe that industry wasn't changing as much, but even if you see, like in your first public company, it's like, okay, if you see any level of stagnation, then that's when it's time for you to move on. If something's stagnating around you, you become a stagnator if you don't move. And so saying, okay, well, I'm going to go do this again. I'm going to do it better. And then you build that. Okay, I'm going to go do it even better. And you're changing, you're developing, you're looking for the next best thing. And these are all traits in our lives that I think if the goal is to build a meaningful legacy, if the goal is to create something that's going to last a long time, that you're going to leave your mark on the world, we have to ask ourselves, are we changing anything? Are we even changing ourselves, let alone changing the world around us? Are we even changing ourselves? And so anything that you're getting too comfortable with, or that you feel is too rote, or habits, if you are wondering, I don't have that many habits, I don't know. There's people who think I just live my life how I want to, and I don't have any habits. You're probably 99% a zombie, but to your subconscious thoughts. But just track it. Like, it's really easy. Track on a piece of paper what you do every 15 to 30 minutes a day. You do that for a week, you're going to see how much of your life is completely unintentional and just happens the way it happens. It's not focused. It's not changing. You're not growing. You're just there. And those are the areas that I would inspect and say, is this the way I want it to be? Or should I be changing this faster? What would be the next level? Maybe it's you love studying your scriptures, or you love reading good books every day, and you read them, you're consistent, you put that into your schedule. Well, even a good habit can become habitual to the point that it's not serving you anymore. And so take that habit and say, okay, I consistently developed the habit of reading good things. Wonderful. So now what's the next layer deep of that habit? Now I want to start taking one thing away that I'm going to repeat to myself 3 times a day, or one thing away that I'm going to apply today. So you take that habit and you compound it. And then once you've applied it, then I'm going to share it with somebody else. And you just start developing these habits to where they're getting super, super focused. But if you just stop with, why I put good habits in my life, I think the best habit, again, on that same trip with my wife up the mountain, I also told her this. So that, these are all third date conversations. If you didn't get a hint. So have these conversations. I told her, look, if the person that you think you're going to marry is me, you might marry me, but the only thing I can tell you about the future is I will not be me in 3 years from now. So if you're marrying me because you like me right now, it's not going to work out, because the only thing I'm committed to in my life is to be changing. So that's like my one overarching absolute commitment nobody's taking from me is I'm going to be changing. So if you're marrying me for me, you're not going to get me in 5 years from now. You're going to get some other version of whoever Sam decided to become.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to you, although I'm saying that that is who you are, so that you're a person who embraces change, and but that fundamentally underneath that, you have a certain character, and that character will be there throughout the change. So when your wife marries you, she marries you for your essence, not for exactly what you're doing at that time.
Yeah,
right?
For the character, for the things that she can that are going to be consistent. But what I like to wear, what I like to eat, how long I like to watch TV or not watch TV, or all those things that, I like this. I just see this a lot with people. They marry people or they get in relationships with people because they feel like their lives fit together. And it's like that. And these are such funny conversations I had with my wife. On our first date, she asked me if I thought she was attractive, like if I was, what type of guy I was. And I was like, well, how truthful do you want me to be? Now, keep in mind, I didn't know much about women really at that point, but so she said she wanted the full truth. So I was like, well, frankly, you're not really the body type that I think I'm attracted to. But physical attraction in this process of like finding a spouse is only 30% of the equation, and you're pretty. Like you're good enough, basically.
Yeah, I'm lucky I didn't say that to my wife.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm not saying I'm the shining example of like treat your people this way, but what I will say, and what I will stand by to the day's end, is that for me, I believe that because I've seen enough people's looks change over their lifetime that if I'm marrying somebody for their looks, I'm screwed. That's an unrealistic expectation going into a relationship, that you're always going to like the way somebody looks. People change.
I would say this, right. I think I would say this about marriage, and you obviously have some very candid conversations with your wife, which is great. I think that, as you're marrying somebody, one of the things that's very important is to have that kind of honesty of conversation. And part of it is about trying to make each other better at what you are. I mean, so if you have two people that get married, they should be better than they would have been individually, ideally, I mean, I think that's the essence of a great marriage, where you're both making each other just better. You're elevating each other. And I think that in business, the same thing holds true. If you have leadership teams, there has to be real honesty with one another, and you're elevating one another and forcing one another to simply just get better and to up your game. And I've been fortunate to surround myself with people that I think have made me better at my game in business. And my wife, for absolute positive sure, has made me better at what I do and who I am.
I love it. Okay, well, we are out of time again. Thank you so much. I just love this podcast. It's just been so good having these conversations with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share more of who you are and the way you think and how you operate, because it impacts me and it helps me become better and be more focused on, well, am I building what I'm building in a way that's sustainable, that's marketable, and that can actually improve the lives of the people around me, and always keeping that at the forefront of my mind. Am I building something that's going to be bigger than me, or am I building it for me? And I appreciate that aspect of this conversation. the last two conversations. We talked about this last time, but your book, it's the valueequation.com, right? Where they can get your book.
Well, you can get my book on Amazon and or Apple or wherever, but the book is The Value Equation. I'm showing it to you over here, but I'm guessing we're not going to be doing video here on the podcast. But it's a value equation. It's a business guide to wealth creation for entrepreneurs, leaders, and investors, and it will tell you how wealth is created in America. And it's probably the only book written on how businesses create wealth. And the reason that's important is because 2/3 of American millionaires made their money through business. And so it's really helpful for people to understand this. It'll be helpful if you read the book. I think it'll make you choose your jobs more wisely in terms of where you want to work. And then if you're choosing to invest money, I think it will help you make better investment decisions. So I welcome your readers to look it up on Amazon, and would love to have them buy the book, make comments on Amazon, which would be really helpful to me. And feel free to contact me on LinkedIn and make any comments or have any questions, and I'll answer them.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. This was an absolute treat. I really am grateful that you agreed to come back for a second conversation.
Sam, I enjoyed it.
And with your next book, let me know. Let me know when the next book is. I'll probably reach out to you, and maybe we'll go grab lunch sometime since we're close enough.
Yeah, we're close enough. And I'd love that. And I was saying there wasn't going to be a second book, but maybe there will be. So
yeah, hey,
I'm warming up to the subject.
You have a lot of great stuff, so I'm sure it doesn't all fit in one book. So, hey, just appreciate you so much, and we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.